Good morning, Internet. Lizard here today with a video on cities. We're going to talk about how to establish them, we're going to talk about how to name them, and we're going to talk about why that's important. Now, you do want several options when you place a city on your map. You name it and establish it, or you establish it and you name it. Or, if you're a gold star world builder, you have a conlang for the region and you use that. My first and only one is in the desert. We're going to go in the order of establishing a city and then name it. So when we say establish a city, what exactly do we mean by that? I mean justifying it in your world. To justify a city's existence, we can start with why people went there in the first place and what caused them to stay. This also to an extent determines size, but I do think a city's population should be figured independently to the establishment. Large cities in fantasy are generally very old, so modeling populations is a good way to envision the scope of the world building required to include the city. If it's an older, larger city, you're going to need to do a lot more world building than putting a village of 100 people next to a natural resource. When you have what you need for the first questions, move on to who is in charge and what cultural customs have arisen when adapting to the land, work, and rulers. So basically, history, purpose, rulers, culture, HPRC. This list could be longer, but it gets us asking the right questions. How do we get here? Why are we here? Who is in charge and why? What has living here made us? Now this is loosely based off of the SPERM criteria, society, politics, economy, religion, and military, which I originally saw in a Dael Kingsmill video on cities. I like the idea of this, but I hate saying it out loud, because it's SPERM. Also, I feel like it's redundant, but in a helpful way. I've used this for larger cities and found it thorough, but just the same, it leaves a lot to be desired in the history department. So, like, if you have a city of, like, over 8,000, I would say maybe do a SPERM analysis of it, but really all you need is a good establishment myth and a fun little gambit. But here are my hot tips. You gotta have a purpose rooted in geography that is commonplace. So like, we're all here because iron is here, and we're getting that iron to get that bread. Exports matter, and I like inland trade networks determining the locations of ports, or vice versa, depending on how your history. Maybe they got to the port city first. Who knows? How do people feel about the landed elite? Are they nice? Do they provide a good enough level of social services to keep the lay people satiated? Or are times tumultuous? And then how do cultural practices stemming from variable world conditions, like the seasonal or the geological, affect the city? The last thing is like, you know, once we have a population, how do we know if there's magic or military or whatever? So I just use some pretty easy rules for my spreadsheets. I have 5% of the population is magical in a high magic setting, and only 1% in a low magic setting. Likewise, military is usually about 10% of the population, but a total force pool of 15 to 20% in times of dire need. Further extrapolation and establishment leads to the wealth of the city and what features stand out, if any. Examples are cities with expensive seawalls, or, you know, a small village built into the stone of a mountain. Both are cool, both are memorable, just different kinds of gambits. I give them exports, I give them a population number in the spreadsheets. Now you instantly know how many guards, how many mages, and what's available for easy trade in the city. I think that establishes a city, so to speak. So now that our city is established, we can pick a name based off of its attributes. This is easier said than done. We could name a small mining village Irontown, but just the same, that's boring as hell. Ferric Burrow doesn't have any flow to it, so what do? We go to indifferentlanguages.com and we look for a word or set of syllables that sounds decent. We can alter this real-world word enough to make it unrecognizable and justify this later by saying it's what people in the region call iron. You could pick a single language and name things in the region using that, but don't just appropriate other cultures for the sake of your fantasy world. That's insensitive, and frankly it's for people too lazy to create a language themselves. Be a gold star world builder. Use conlang, not other people's tongues. There's also the worldly context of naming conventions. Here, in the central region, they name things based off of features, or heroes, or just rich people. Everything is relatively young. The cities on average are about 200 years old, and so this is in the process of becoming an established tradition within the area. On the contrary, in the north, the Winterland, Tarak, people have named most large cities after their ruling family. This originates because of a cold climate. The rich families were able to establish temples where people could go to last the winter, and so the large strongholds of the north are named after the lords that helped establish them and kept their population safe for many hundreds of years. It's one thing to just drop a name on a city and call it a day. It's another to know why cities are named how they are, and I think that this gives a DM wonderful regional consistency. I cannot recommend this approach enough. So just know how things are named, and then naming them within that framework, and then using a non-native language as inspiration when the going gets tough, should have you fleshing out your cities in absolutely no time. Now that you have a name and mythos, the city's exports should be primarily based off of the surrounding natural resources. This could be why people settled there in the first place. Either way, I detail a threefold approach to exports based on surrounding geography. If your village is in a forest, your export 60% wood. If you're on a coastal forest, your city might export 60% of its wood and use the rest to export ships, which would be roughly 30% of its economy. Between wood and ship sales, we have 90% of the exports, a small class of artisans develops, and exports the remaining 10% as luxury goods. This gives us not only an idea of which materials are available in abundance, it also provides us with a simulacrum of the working economy. Most people work in lumber. The upper middle class are mostly shipbuilders and amateur artisans, with the wealthy selling luxury goods and land for development. This is just an example of a city economy using my chart with 3 exports on it. I'm not saying this is the best way to do things, but I do hope it's helpful. It allows one to extrapolate a lot of detail from a simple word on a spreadsheet, which is an invaluable tool when you run a large game in a big city. The best part of this, though, is far and away the shopkeeping. We've all played games where shopping isn't determined by the material logistics of a regional economy, but by a roll of the dice. Also, the city in question will have the guild you want, but only if you remember to ask the DM. This slapdash nature of random drops and nonsensical guild placement leads every city into being the same thing, a place to drink and get cool new shit. This is what I would call a player-centric view of a city's function. In our fake reality, these population centers exist because of the need for materials to reach other places. The employment opportunities that come with this are why the city exists, not so you can finally get boots of levitation between dungeons. So, I suppose we roll dice for the quality of stock, not the availability. I like this. It makes things feel earned and provides a consistent regional backdrop while still spurring the impetus for further travel. Big cities, greater than like 7,500, will usually have tons of specialty shops, and smaller towns will generally only have 1 or 2. This gives the big cities more weight and builds a cohesive regional trade network. I've had examples on the screen the entire time from my map, so I won't waste any more time talking about them, but I think you guys see what I'm getting at. Ask yourself, how did we get here? Why are we still here? Who makes the laws? And how do we feel about that? Between these 4 questions, your city should be really awesome, and it should feel like more of a concrete setting due to the logic of its establishment. And just to include race as a footnote, your cities kind of reflect your worlds. If your world is racist as hell, so are your cities. If parts of your world are racist as hell, parts of your cities will be. Everyone handles race differently, so I'm not really going to touch on that. I feel like it's just better as its own video, but I just figured I'd say something. You can see I have a race chart for all my cities, but I won't explain that right now. Yeah, if you found my content to be useful, funny, inspiring, or just mindless drivel to fill the time of an empty life, please throw me a sub. I'm trying to grow the channel, get me a custom URL. Currently I've got 44 subscribers, you know, let's see what we can do. It's that feel. I'm basically just panhandling for attention on the internet, so, you know, as always, internet, thank you for watching. This has been Lizard, out. We steal it all from pop culture and video games.